Just a few weeks ago, the skies above London town were empty and quiet, as they were above many parts of northern Europe. But if a volcanic eruption should happen again, would we be any the wiser? Also coming up this week.
Join me later in the programme to find out why you should be heading to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in June, and also why you should be packing your bike to New Zealand.
And join me for a close encounter with the world's smallest primate.
Those were the kinds of scenes being played out all around the world as the airline industry was paralysed by volcanic ash across northern Europe. Hello and welcome to Fast Track with me, Rajan Datta. Now, going on holiday is supposed to be a pleasurable experience, but you try telling that to the thousands of stranded passengers, some of whom have only just returned home. And there's no guarantee the same situation won't happen all over again. And in fact, earlier this week, there was an ominous return of the dense plume over UK airspace, thanks to prevailing northeasterly winds. The last time the same volcano erupted in 1821, it continued puffing ash out for about a year. This looks to be an unpredictable summer, scientists say, and it's possible we may reach the same level of disruption again from ash clouds. So Fast Track has enlisted the help of 3 experts to see what lessons have been learnt from the 6-day closure of airspace over northern Europe.
Could it happen again? Absolutely. Volcanoes go off about once a week around the year. There's a chance that these ones in Iceland will go off again. They could blow plumes over Europe. I certainly couldn't discount it.
The crisis was triggered by 2 particular factors. The volcano was covered with ice and hence produced very fine dust that hung around in the air rather than dropping into the sea. And the northerly winds blew the ash right into the path of the busiest stretch of airline traffic in the world.
We've got the air coming in here that's going to actually drive the engine forward, coming through the compressor, just blowing through as dust, doing no damage. It's only when we introduce the fuel, we get the very high temperatures in this region, we can start to melt the dust, and also here it can start to block some of the very, very important cooling we have at the back of the engine.
Now this is the dust going into the jet engine.
And this is the result of the lava reforming inside the turbine and blocking the cooling devices.
It's shrinking ever so slightly and it's enough.
So, are modern engines fit to deal with this sort of problem?
They were good enough to deal with this issue. The situation we had here was that the safety case was based on do not fly through volcanic ash. And so the normal way that we would operate is that we would wait until it blew away or we'd fly around it. Here there was a situation where we had to fly through it. We didn't have a standard. So the way we dealt with that was we did some test flights through it, we made some measurements, and we found the engines were tolerant to this level of dust, and we carried on flying.
So, one big difference is the change of policy from a blanket ban on flights to allowing them to proceed when the density of the ash cloud is deemed low enough by engine manufacturers. When the crisis first hit, test flights by airlines returned, claiming no damage was done to the turbines. Aviation analysts, however, point out that the long-term effect on the planes from this kind of activity would not be welcome.
Volcanic ash has a cumulative effect. Even at very low levels, it sandblasts all of the moving parts in the engines and it changes their shape, which makes the engines less efficient. Because once an engine's efficiency has been damaged as volcanic ash damages it, that is a degradation in performance for the rest of its life. That engine will use more fuel for the power it produces for the rest of its life, and that is a huge cost to absorb.
David Learmount, a former pilot himself, is not impressed by the reaction to the original ban on flights by the likes of BA boss Willie Walsh and Virgin's Richard Branson.
I think if they sent up planes immediately to see whether the ash was actually too dangerous to fly through, or to look for corridors where it, where it wasn't very thick, I think that we would have been back flying a lot sooner.
You couldn't just, as Richard Branson said, fly right underneath all the layers. You could possibly even fly between them. The only trouble is you don't know where they are until you've flown through one, and by that time you've already suffered the damage. And depending on the intensity of what you've gone through, that damage might stop your engines.
Last week, a meeting of European transport ministers supported the concept of a single European sky, whereby all air traffic would be coordinated rather than handled by individual countries. But will it make Europe more able to deal with new ash clouds?
I think that's the biggest load of rubbish I have ever heard in my life. It's really rather like, saying air traffic controllers can decide where the volcanic ash cloud goes. I'm sorry, they can't. It's rather like saying the Royal Navy can decide to fend off a tsunami. I mean, this is a natural phenomenon. Air traffic control has nothing to do with it.
Of course, there are now thousands of other people who probably regard themselves as experts in this kind of situation, the stranded travellers themselves. Now, we've been inundated with emails from you about your own personal experiences, about airlines that promised passengers they'd be priority once flights started, and they weren't, to tour operators who moved stranded passengers into cheaper hotels and only promised to pay for an extra 2 nights maximum. The main gripe generally is a basic lack of information.
It was the last chance of getting the daughter of 11 onto a jumbo jet without having to pay for it as an adult. We booked it a year before, and I suppose about a month before, I'd come home from work and the kids had been Googling, this is what we're going to do in Jamaica, this is what we want to do.
Paul's family were among 30 tourists stranded in Jamaica. They were supposed to return on the 17th of April, but instead were delayed by a fortnight. Paul says the travel company rep was next to useless and information was scarce on the ground.
They must have had an action plan to say, right, okay, when it opens, this is what is going to happen. Tell people what the action plan is. When it opens on Thursday, you lot will be going. If it opens on Friday, you lot will be going.
Some airlines even offered seats for sale to new customers whilst their own passengers waited to return, and some stranded passengers forked out for new tickets on other airlines in a desperate attempt to get home. Of course, many, like Paul's family, were put up in a nice hotel, and airlines based in Europe were obliged to fork out for food and accommodation. Some, even outside EU rules, felt obliged to help too.
Well, the principle that we applied throughout the airspace closures with the flight disruptions was to, whenever we can, do the right thing. Would we do it exactly the same way again? I don't know, because every scenario is different.
So, is there a veiled message there that passengers may not always be so well protected? Some experts say economic factors, like the estimated loss to the European airline industry of $1.7 billion, may not allow a repeat of such generous compensation to travellers.
European passengers, air passengers, have a phenomenal level of rights which not in all parts of the world are passengers accorded. And I think one of the things they're going to have to look at is whether it is the duty of an airline to look after people who are down the route, to look after them indefinitely, fully at their own expense, no questions asked, when it's a natural phenomenon.
The warning signs earlier this week from a second wave of ash plumes from Iceland has concentrated minds once more. But the truth is, every situation presents a different set of circumstances and problems. The volcanic eruption may have been an act of God, but it's us mere mortals, the travelling public, who'll end up paying. One leading centre for research estimates that the airlines will hike up prices by as much as 11.5% over the next 3 years to claw back lost income. OK, let's see what else is making news